I promise you. When I'm your president, we will end years of politicization at the Department of Justice.
And is there a different standard for a Democrat Secretary of State versus a former Republican president? I think there needs to be one standard of justice in this country.
Even though they trail behind him in virtually every Republican poll, Mike Pence and Ron DeSantis still couldn't bring themselves to criticize the twice impeached and now twice indicted former president. Meanwhile, the emperor with no clothes was in Georgia yesterday, where Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis continues to pursue her far-ranging investigation into whether Donald Trump committed election interference in his attempts to overturn the 2020 election results. Trump appearing yesterday for the Georgia Republican Convention, and his base showed up in support. This was also the first time we got to hear from Trump since the indictment was unsealed, and he said pretty much what you would expect.
They come to me, how do you stand this? And I usually look at them and say, in a sick way, I sort of enjoy it. Because it exposes them. It exposes them for what they are. And it's also lifted the poll numbers to even higher legs.
Joining me now for more on this is Rick Wilson, co-founder of the Lincoln Project and the author of Running Against the Devil, a plot to save America from Trump and Democrats from themselves. Rick, good morning. According to Politico, Trump announcing he will keep running even if he's convicted. I have this image of him in handcuffs and like a chain and, ball and chain running down the street. So let's start with the big question. How delusional is Donald Trump to think that he could literally run for the Oval Office as a convicted felon?
He could. I mean, there's nothing in the Constitution that says he can't run if he's a felon. Maybe the 14th Amendment stuff, but this is a guy who has a group of people in the Republican Party. You've seen it from every other candidate running in the primary. You've seen it from the entire Republican media apparatus. They have convinced themselves that these serious, dangerous, real, consequential charges from Trump's terrible behavior of exposing national security secrets in clear violation of the law, they've convinced themselves it's not Trump, it's a conspiracy against him. And so he could run, I think, even as a convicted felon. I don't know how quickly this case will go to trial. I don't know that the DOJ will have the stones to stay in this fight as the election gets closer. But you've got a guy who has got a powerful delusion shield around him that it's fed not only by Trump himself, but by the Republican base, the Republican media apparatus, and of course, even the other Republican candidates who claim they want to replace him.
So, Rick, let's talk about how sycophants can actually become violence. The New York Times has an article with the headline, quote, Trump supporters' violent rhetoric in his defense disturbs experts. That piece goes on to say experts on political violence warn that attacks against people or institutions become more likely when elected officials or prominent media figures are able to issue threats or calls for violence with impunity. How realistic are concerns that Trump and his followers could incite more violence as his indictments continue to rise in number and his prison exposure grows?
Oh, Katie, it's enormously significant because, look, we ended up in January 6th of 2021 with a mob storming the Capitol trying to kill people. We ended up with a mob at Donald Trump's direct order trying to overthrow an election. You've got Clay Higgins, you've got Carrie Lake, you've got all these other folks who are now, like, they're saying the quiet part out loud. If you try to hold Trump to a standard of accountability and justice, we will kill you. That's what they're saying. We should take it seriously. The Department of Justice should take it seriously. Law enforcement should take it seriously. These are people who aren't doing this rhetorically. They're not doing it with a nod and a wink. They're now saying things like, we're going to storm the battlements if you arrest Donald Trump. If you convict Donald Trump, there will be violence. Take the promise seriously. We're in late stage American democracy right now, and there's an authoritarian movement that understands that force of action through violence is a weapon that they're willing to use, and they believe it is politically consequential for them, and that there will not be repercussions in the political space over it.
But Rick, let's talk about, though, the realities and the deterrent effect of people like the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys doing time and serious prison time for their involvement on January 6th. You don't think that that sends a clear message to those that want to follow the call for violence that comes from people like Donald Trump, that there's some very real jail consequences if they take up arms?
Well, what the folks like Lauren Boebert and Carrie Lake and Clay Higgins and the rest haven't seen yet out of the January 6 convictions is anybody in the ringleader status going to jail. Maybe Stuart Rhodes you could count in that category, but they haven't seen, and they've seen foot soldiers going to jail, and they're more than willing to have lower tier people engage in stochastic violence against the country to protect Donald Trump. They're more than willing to throw any number of foot soldiers under the wheels in order to achieve their political ends. Because right now you've got people like Josh Hawley again and Clay Higgins, all these people that are hinting and nudging and nodding and winking at violent action to protect Donald Trump. And they know so far Roger Stone isn't in jail, Steve Bannon isn't in jail, Alex Jones isn't in jail. The rest of the people that were in the Willard, in the war room during January 6th, they're not in jail. And so those people at the top feel like they're protected and immune. They're also gambling. I think it's not the worst gamble in the world that if they get Donald Trump elected again, all will be forgiven, everyone will be pardoned, and everyone will go on their merry way. Look, if Donald Trump is elected again, every January 6th person, I promise you, will be out of jail in a hot minute. He will free them all.
Rick, the Lincoln Project has a new ad out. Let's take a quick listen.
What will Trump get? The men and women running against him for president will defend him, praise him, make excuses. They'll lie about the prosecution and make up stories about the deep state.
So obviously, Rick, that's just a portion of that ad, and I invite people to go and watch that. Tell us a little bit more about what we didn't see from that ad.
Right. The front end of that ad basically says, let's look at people who are convicted and under the Espionage Act. Let's look at who gets indicted under the Espionage Act. And it's the worst of the worst. It's people like Robert Hansen, who betrayed this country, Aldrich Ames, who betrayed this country, John Walker, who betrayed this country, people who are spies, who are people who engaged in the worst kind of betrayal of trust in American law, where you gave secrets to the enemy, where you exposed the most sensitive national defense secrets to the enemy, including nuclear secrets, including battle plans, which could cost the lives of American troops in the field. This is the kind of consequential thing where it's good to remind people that this isn't some triviality that Trump has been indicted on. This isn't some minor, this isn't a traffic ticket. This is betraying America at a level that is absolutely unprecedented in any time in our history from an American president.
Rick Wilson, as always, you bring the truth. I appreciate you being here, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Katie.